Welcome to our lesson on asexual and sexual reproduction. Through asexual reproduction, you have a single parent passing on all of its information, all of its genetic information to its offspring, and the offspring end up being genetic identicals to the parent, they're clones. And there's different types of asexual reproduction. You already learned about some of them. One is binary fission, and that's how bacteria reproduce. If you remember, during binary fission, a bacteria will copy its single chromosome. It'll elongate and it'll split into two identical bacteria. Fragmentation is a new one that we're learning, and in this case, a body part will break off a multicellular organism and grow into an adult, and we'll take a look at that. During budding, a new individual will split off from an old one, and that occurs in something known as a hydra. And then parthenogenesis involves a female that lays eggs, and the eggs grow into an adult without fertilization, and the adults are going to be all female, and they're going to be, again, clones of the parent. So the first one was binary fission, and you can see the bacteria here undergoing this process. The second one is fragmentation, right? So as long as a starfish has one leg and a piece of the middle, a fragment of a starfish, if it's broken off, it can grow into an adult new starfish, and this process is asexual. Here you see an organism called a hydra, and this is the parent, and the offshoot growing off of it is the offspring. It's going to be a clone of the parent, and it's going to break off, and it's going to become separate. And this organism here is called a Daphnia, and this is a special type of desert lizard. And both of these organisms lay eggs, and those eggs become adults without becoming fertilized, so without any input from a father, and they become clones of the parent. During sexual reproduction, you have two parents, and both parents give genetic information to the offspring, and the offspring is a combination of the different types of genes that they get from their parents. Gametes are the reproductive cells that are involved in sexual reproduction, and the male version is the sperm and the female version is the egg. During fertilization, the egg and the sperm, the two gametes, will come together and they are going to fuse with each other. And when they fuse with each other, they're going to form the first cell of a new organism, and that cell is called the zygote. So during sexual reproduction, like we mentioned, you get a blend from both parents. You don't get a genetic identical. So here you can see a picture of me with my daughter, and you can see that there's similarities between us, right? Genetic similarities, but my daughter is definitely not a clone. So some similarities might include, like, our hair color looks pretty close, right? Some of maybe our eye shape is similar, but then there's distinct features that are mine and distinct features that are hers. You can see our nose shape is completely different. She's got this cute little upturned nose. So sexual reproduction results in genetically unique and new individuals. All right, so back to the human life cycle. We have been working on this when we talked about mitosis, but to go back over it, we know that we start with an egg and the sperm. These are our gametes, and they have half the genetic information, and this is the process we just discussed. They come together through fertilization. The sperm is going to put its genetic information into the egg, and together they're going to form a diploid zygote, a zygote that has two sets of the information, one from mom, one from dad. And of course, this zygote is going to go through mitosis to make more and more cells, and this part is asexual reproduction of cells. And those cells are going to differentiate until we form adults with all the normal adult organs, and then females are going to produce eggs, and males are going to be producing sperm cells. So today, we're going to start talking about this process here known as meiosis. Before we get there, got to clarify some terms. So there are germ cells, and germ cells are specialized for sexual reproduction. In animals, diploid germ cells undergo meiosis to produce egg and sperm. So these are special types of cells involved in reproduction. And then other types of cells are, every other cell actually is called a somatic cell. And somatic cells do not participate in sexual reproduction. They include things like your skin cells and muscle cells. Those never are involved in sexual reproduction. So right here, you can see this is a primordial germ cell. And this type of cell eventually is going to be used to form, in this case, sperm. Females have these types of germ cells too, but in females, they're going to form egg cells. So these are germ cells. They're involved in sexual reproduction. Every other cell in your body, so your blood cells, your nerve cells, these are cheek cells, skin cells, muscle cells, all of these cells are called somatic cells. They don't get passed on directly to your children. They're not used to make egg and sperm. They're not involved in sexual reproduction. So the term for them is somatic cell. So why do some organisms reproduce sexually while others reproduce asexually? And why hasn't one won out over the other one through evolutionary history and become the dominant form of reproduction? And the reason is that there's different advantages and disadvantages associated with each. So asexual reproduction is simple and it's very efficient, very fast. There's no need to find a mate to reproduce. You don't need to find a female or a male of your species, rather, to be able to reproduce. And the organisms that are coming out of this process end up being clones and copies of the parent. Now, the issue with this is that if something changes in the environment, asexual reproducing organisms are less able to adapt as a species, right? Because they're all the same. They all have the same genes. They're susceptible to the same types of diseases, the same bacteria, the same types of environmental stressors. If it's going to kill one of the organisms, it's going to kill all of them because they're genetic identicals. So sexual reproduction, on the other hand, is complicated. It takes a long time. Organisms have to find a mate or they can't reproduce. But the result and the upside is that the organisms that are produced through sexual reproduction, they're genetically different. They're very diverse. So if something changes in the environment, like all of a sudden a new bacteria comes or a drought comes, since not all of the offspring are the same, some of them might have genes that make them better adapted to the new conditions. Maybe they're resistant to a type of disease, or maybe they can handle less water than the other ones. And your chances are you're going to have some of that species that can actually survive in response to the stress. This over here was the water flea, the Daphnia that we saw earlier. And the Daphnia actually can reproduce asexually, where it lays eggs and the eggs develop into adults without fertilization. And this will happen in good times. In good times, the Daphnia will be asexual. It'll lay eggs. It won't fertilize them. However, it turns out that the Daphnia can switch over to sexual reproduction during stress conditions like there's starvation and extreme temperatures. And when this Daphnia is under stress, basically what happens is that it will start producing males and it's going to start reproducing sexually, where the eggs will become fertilized. So even organisms that can reproduce asexually don't always reproduce asexually, because sexual reproduction provides an advantage when conditions are bad because it increases the likelihood that you produce some individuals with unique genes that allow them to survive the environmental stressor. Okay, so we've already discussed these terms, but we're going to look at them again. Diploid refers to two sets of chromosomes, and all our somatic cells are diploid. So our nerve cells, for example, have two sets of chromosomes, or our skin cells have two sets of chromosomes. They're diploid. Haploid is a cell that has only one set of chromosomes, and haploid cells are our gametes, the egg and the sperm. We talked about homologous chromosomes. Homologous chromosomes are chromosomes that are similar in size, shape, and the kinds of genes that they contain. And we know we have 23 pairs, right? And most of them are homologous pairs, with one notable exception. And that is in males. Their sex chromosomes are not homologous because males have an X and a Y chromosome. So if we look at this a little bit bigger, because this is a nice picture, here is an egg cell, right? And an egg cell is haploid. It has 23 chromosomes, and you can count them just to double check if you don't believe me. And then this is the sperm cell here, and it also has 23 chromosomes. It has one of each, right, type of chromosome. It has one of chromosome 1, and this one has one of chromosome 1, and this one has one of chromosome 2, and this one does too. And when they come together through fertilization to produce the zygote, you have the 23 and the 23 added together to form this diploid zygote. And now you have one of each, one from mom and one from dad for chromosome 1, one from mom and one from dad for chromosome 2, all the way down to that 23rd pair. All right, and this is what we meant by homologous and not homologous chromosomes. So this is a female karyotype, so all these are paired up. And since this is a female, we have the X and the X. This is also homologous. If this was a male, he would have a Y chromosome and only one of the X chromosomes, and those wouldn't be considered homologs. Okay, so autosomes and sex chromosomes. Autosomes are chromosomes with genes that don't determine sex. So 1 through 22 have nothing to do with the sex of the organism. They're called autosomes. And the last two, that 23rd pair, either XX or XY, is what's known as the sex chromosomes. And the sex chromosomes determine in humans if this is going to be a male or a female. And since we have an X and a Y here, this is a male karyotype. Females, as we mentioned earlier, have XX. Okay, so that brings us to meiosis, which is that part of the life cycle that is used to make the egg and sperm, and is a very important part of sexual reproduction. So in mitotic cell division, which we discussed in the previous lesson, cells divide to produce 2 new cells that have the same number of chromosomes as the parent cell. During meiotic cell division, which is the new one, the daughter cells are going to have half the number of chromosomes that are in the parent cell. We need to come and create egg and sperm that have half the information. So during meiosis, a diploid cell goes through 2 divisions to form 4 haploid cells, and I'll show you what that looks like right here. So here we have the formation of sperm, and here we have the formation of an egg. And you start with a germ cell that is diploid, right? And what happens is it goes through meiosis 1, where it splits once, and it goes through meiosis 2, so it splits a second time, and you end up with 4 new cells that are haploid, that have half the information. So you have 4 shiny new sperm here that are off to swim and do their thing. And then here in the egg formation, you still produce 4 new cells, but in females, 3 of them are going to end up dying, and you're going to have 1 of them become your shiny new egg cell. So this is meiosis, and the point of meiosis is to get gametes, these guys, gametes that have half the information as the parent did. And remember why we need to do that? The reason why is because the egg and the sperm are going to come together to produce a zygote, and that zygote needs to have 46 chromosomes. If you had 46 in the egg and you had 46 in the sperm, then you would be in trouble because they would not add up to 46 in the zygote. You'd have double that amount. So we need to find a way to get to have our eggs and our sperm to have half the genetic information that the other cells, the somatic cells, do. And we do that through the process of meiosis. Okay, and in summary, just to compare the 2 processes that we've learned, in mitosis, you create 2 daughter cells that are genetic identicals, copies of the parent. And in meiosis, you start with a parent cell, and you end up with 4 daughter cells that are not copies of the parent and that have half of the genetic information that the parent did. So next time, we're going to take a closer look at meiosis and see how exactly it works. Thank you so much for listening.